Welcome to Tax Problems Explained from the perspective of an attorney, a CPA, and a former IRS agent.
Welcome to Tax Problems Explained from the perspective of an attorney, a CPA, and a former IRS agent, all in one, with Lawrence T. Ullmann. With decades of experience inside the IRS and in private practice, Lawrence helps individuals and businesses understand how the tax system really works and how to resolve serious tax issues. I'm LeAnn Lyon, and today we are talking about what can happen when someone delays addressing a tax issue and why waiting often leads to more complicated outcomes. Hello, Lawrence. It's great to see you again.
Great to see you too, LeAnn.
Lawrence, what tends to lead people to delay dealing with a tax issue in the first place?
Well, there are several things that can happen. One, just the overwhelm of life. People get so tied up in what they're doing, they put it aside and say, I will get to it later. Another reason is embarrassment. Sometimes taxpayers are embarrassed that they don't have a good set of books and records, or whatever the problem is. So that can also do it. And then the third is procrastination. A lot of times people say, well, I'll get to it tomorrow. And then tomorrow never comes and the problems start to result.
I will be very tongue-in-cheek and say, wow, I can't imagine any of those. When someone chooses not to respond right away, how does the situation typically begin to evolve with the IRS?
Well, it starts slowly with the IRS. They'll normally send out a notice for whatever the reason is. And if that doesn't get responded to, they'll send out another notice and then a third, and they'll start to get a little bit more urgent in the language. Then if the taxpayer still doesn't respond, it can escalate from there. It can go to automated collection services. It can go to a revenue officer. I mean, it can definitely get more complicated.
So how does the IRS's approach tend to change when a tax issue is left unaddressed over time?
Well, if the taxpayer doesn't respond, what could have been maybe a simple solution becomes more difficult. Lots of things can happen. First of all, as I mentioned a moment ago, the case can go from just the regular computer notices to ACS, which is automated collection services. This makes it more serious. If it doesn't get resolved at ACS, then it can go into the hands of a revenue officer. This can get very serious because now we're dealing with a human who is able to go down to where the taxpayer lives, knock on the door, talk with neighbors, things of that nature. So it can definitely escalate. The other problem that can happen is some of the things that may be available to resolve the issue, such as going to appeals or things of that nature, have time limits. And if the taxpayer hasn't responded within that time limit, these choices are no longer choices. They're not available.
When do penalties and interest start to kick in when a tax issue is being delayed?
Well, what happens is there's the failure to file penalty, failure to pay penalty. These go month to month or fraction thereof. And they interest goes on top of that. So the penalties, if one waits long enough, sometimes the penalties and interest can be 2-3 times what the deficiency is. So definitely waiting can cost a lot of money when it comes to penalties and interest.
Can you walk through a general example of someone who delayed addressing a tax issue and how that decision affected the outcome?
Well, let's take payroll taxes, because payroll taxes can really be a problem. It's complicated, etc. Let's say an individual misses filing a 941, gets a notice. At that time, if the taxpayer responds, gets the tax return in, there may be a small penalty for 1 month or whatever the time period is, but it can be resolved. However, what happens in many cases is, again, the taxpayer, either through embarrassment or the overwhelm of life or what have you, doesn't respond. So these penalties start to add up. Uh, and if the taxpayer hasn't, if the notice that was originally sent out had to do with a tax return and the taxpayer hasn't responded, the Internal Revenue Service will take what information it has and prepare a return called a substitute for return. It will assess the tax. And now, if the taxpayer responds at this late date, uh, we have to try to undo what the IRS has done. It becomes much more complicated. And then finally, if there's still no response, it can go into enforced collection, and that's going to create a problem.
And that's where it becomes more and more difficult to solve, correct?
Definitely.
Okay. What misunderstandings do people often have about trying to wait things out with the IRS? Is there any such thing?
Well, a lot of times taxpayers will think, well, I'm small. Maybe the IRS will just forget about it. Or if I don't respond, they'll just go after someone else. Uh, the IRS doesn't forget. It may take a while before it gets to really enforcement uh, uh, tactics, but it doesn't forget. The other thing is, a lot of times, again, the taxpayer just feels, well, I'll get to it tomorrow and procrastinates. These, all of these become very problematic if the taxpayer doesn't respond.
When somebody realizes that they really have waited longer than they should have, what should they take into account before deciding how to move forward?
Well, the first thing they should do is uh, uh, look at the problem, the issue, and say to themselves, do I have the records that are necessary to prove this or not? Also, take a look and see where they are as far as how long they have procrastinated, because again, certain things may not be available uh, because time limits have come and gone. Uh, the third thing they need to do is determine uh, whether or not this is something that is complicated enough to where they need a professional, someone that's going to be able to know exactly what to do. The other thing, another thing that they should also be aware of is it just 1 year or is it multiple years? Um, these are just some of the factors that should go into the taxpayer trying to determine how to get out of the mess that the taxpayer got him or herself into in the first place.
One more question about this. Is it different between when a business is behind or when an individual is behind with the IRS?
Not really. Um, uh, the business may be more complicated because, again, business returns uh, are normally more complicated than an individual. But as far as what the IRS does, as far as how the IRS escalates um, in a situation where someone is not responding, it doesn't matter whether it's an individual or a corporation or,
What's
any type of taxpayer.
what's as we wrap up today's episode, what's one thing you would like to tell someone who knows they're a little behind or maybe even a lot behind? What should they know?
Well, if they're behind, it's not like a red wine. It's not going to get better with age. It's more like a Beaujolais wine. You have to take care of it and drink it real quickly. So the important thing is to definitely uh, respond because the Internal Revenue Service uh, is not going to forget. They're not going to move on to another taxpayer, and the penalties and interest and all the other problems are just going to keep multiplying. Uh, so that would be the best advice I could give to some.
So much for that 2009 Beaujolais I found at the garage sale. Guess
Right.
it'll have to go. But we'll jump on those tax situations right away. Well, thank you. That is it for today's episode of Tax Problems Explained from the perspective of an attorney, a CPA, and a former IRS agent all in one. If you are dealing with a tax issue and are unsure how to move forward, you can visit lawrenceullman.com. And thanks for listening. Be sure to like, leave a review, and share this episode with someone who might need it. Thank you, Lawrence.
Thank you, LeAnn. Have a great day.
You too.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.